My name is Michael, and today, I want to begin by asking you something. Have you ever met someone and thought, this is it? This is the person I want to build my future with, only to watch them shatter your trust, leaving you drowning in a sea of empty excuses? That's exactly how my story unfolds. Even before my wife, Addison, ever suggested the idea of an open marriage, a thinly veiled excuse to cover up what she was already doing, I had already seen through the lies. By then, I knew the painful truth. She had been unfaithful. At that point, there was nothing left to salvage. Our marriage was shattered beyond repair, and I realized there was only one option left: to end it. But to truly understand how everything came crashing down, you need to hear the full story, from the very beginning. Let's rewind. I first learned about Addison through one of my closest female friends. She had posted a casual picture on social media, just a simple snapshot of her and Addison hanging out. There was nothing extraordinary about the photo, yet something about Addison instantly captured my attention. She stayed in my mind, refusing to fade away. I wouldn't let it go. I kept pestering my friend, practically begging her to introduce me to the girl in the photo. At first, she laughed it off, teasing that I was being dramatic. But I stayed persistent, refusing to give up. Eventually, she gave in and agreed to set us up. She organized what was, for all intents and purposes, a blind date. I had no real idea what to expect. But the moment Addison walked through the door, I was completely spellbound. She was even more breathtaking in person than I had imagined. The chemistry between us was immediate, undeniable. It felt rare, electric, like something out of a dream. I just knew she was what I had been searching for. From that night on, everything moved fast. We exchanged numbers, and it wasn't long before we were texting constantly, having late-night conversations, and making plans to see each other again and again. I was completely captivated, not just by her beauty, but by how easily our conversations flowed. Our dreams, our ambitions, even our emotions seemed to align naturally. It felt effortless. Naturally, we made things official and began dating exclusively. After about a year and a half of being inseparable, we decided to move in together. It made perfect sense. We were practically living at each other's places already, and moving in felt like the next step forward. Another year and a half went by, filled with our share of highs and lows, like any couple. Eventually, I knew it was time. I proposed. And when Addison said yes, I believed with all my heart that we were about to start a lifetime together. We married shortly after the proposal, and you might think that was the start of our happily ever after. But looking back now, I realized the warning signs had been there from the beginning, signs I had chosen to ignore. When you're deeply in love, it's frighteningly easy to overlook the cracks, to make excuses for someone simply because you can't bear the idea of losing them. What I hadn't mentioned yet was that about 6 months before I proposed, I had started noticing subtle but undeniable changes in Addison. She grew distant, still there physically, but emotionally, it felt like she was miles away. The warmth she once showered on me began to fade. I could feel her slipping away, though I desperately tried to convince myself otherwise. Rather than facing the truth head-on, I made a huge mistake. I thought proposing would fix everything. I convinced myself that slipping a ring onto her finger would somehow heal the rift between us, that it would remind her of how much she was loved and secure our bond. What I didn't understand at the time was that no amount of jewelry could fix a broken relationship. All I did was try to glue together shattered pieces and hope they would somehow hold. Spoiler alert, they didn't. After the wedding, for a short while, things actually seemed better. Addison became affectionate again, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like I had my wife back, the woman I had fallen so deeply in love with. The woman I had fallen so deeply for seemed to have returned, but it was short-lived. This time, it wasn't just about emotional distance. Whenever I gently asked if something was bothering her, she shut down completely. Instead of opening up, she began dropping subtle hints about wanting more material things. And if I so much as hesitated, if I questioned whether we could afford them or whether they were even necessary, she would explode. She'd snap with cutting remarks like, "This is why I never tell you anything in the first place." Most of the time, I bit my tongue, letting her anger slide just to avoid conflict. But that wasn't the only thing quietly eating away at me. Little by little, I started catching her in small lies. She would tell me stories about her day at work, but often, the pieces didn't quite fit together. Maybe she'd say a meeting ran long, or that she grabbed a quick drink with coworkers to celebrate finishing a big project. I wanted so badly to believe her that I didn't dig too deep. But later, when she'd retell the same story, new details would slip out, details that didn't match what she said before. One evening, she claimed the meeting dragged on because her boss was disorganized. Later, it casually slipped out that they were actually throwing a surprise birthday party at the office. The inconsistencies started piling up. I began paying closer attention. And whenever I gently pointed out the contradictions, Addison would immediately become defensive. Every single time. Rather than push her and risk another argument, I usually just let it go. I kept convincing myself that maybe I was overthinking, that it wasn't worth starting a fight over what might be innocent mistakes. But the lies didn't stay small for long. Over time, they grew into something much harder to ignore. Addison started coming home later and later. At first, she blamed it on heavy workloads, late meetings, urgent deadlines. It sounded reasonable enough, and I wanted to trust her. But soon, her reasons kept shifting. Sometimes she'd stumble through the door smelling strongly of alcohol, claiming she had been celebrating with coworkers or meeting friends for impromptu get-togethers. If it wasn't work, it was friends. If it wasn't friends, it was some other spontaneous plan she forgot to mention. I didn't want to become the paranoid, controlling husband who grilled his wife every time she left the house. So I chose trust, or at least I tried. But things took a much darker turn when our intimacy began to vanish. Whenever I reached for her at night, she would pull away, murmuring that she was exhausted, overwhelmed by work stress, or simply not in the mood. Whenever I tried to sit down and talk honestly about what was happening between us, she would turn it around, making me feel like I was the problem. More often than not, I ended up apologizing for simply trying to communicate. It got to a point where I felt like a stranger in my own home, constantly tiptoeing, terrified that even the smallest word or action might trigger another outburst. If she got upset, she would either storm off or coldly demand space. I stayed patient, calm, telling myself that if I just held on, things might heal themselves. That somehow, someway, we'd find our way back. And then came a Wednesday night I will never forget. I had just finished a long day at work when Addison called. She told me she had to stay late, that a last-minute project had dropped onto her team's plate, and they absolutely had to meet a morning deadline. I didn't question it. It wasn't the first time she had claimed to be buried under deadlines. Trying to be thoughtful, I decided to stop at her favorite bakery on the way home. I picked out some of her favorite treats, thinking maybe, just maybe, a small gesture could remind us both of better days. Despite all the cracks in our relationship, part of me stubbornly clung to hope. When I arrived at her office building, I parked and headed inside. The lobby was almost completely empty, just a weary-looking security guard half-heartedly flipping through a magazine. I approached him and asked if he could buzz me up to Addison's floor. I asked if I could just drop off the snacks, but the security guard gave me a confused look. "Sir, most of the offices cleared out over an hour ago," he said. "There's no one up there now." At first, I figured he had to be mistaken. Still, I thanked him, turned around, and headed back to my car, the bag of treats still in my hand. Sitting behind the wheel, I froze for a moment, a sinking feeling gathering in my gut. Trying to stay calm, I dialed Addison under the pretense of asking if she knew where some documents were. She answered casually, her tone light, claiming she was still at the office, just tying up a few loose ends before heading home. I listened carefully, every word slicing deeper, realizing how smoothly and effortlessly she was lying. When the call ended, something suddenly sparked in my memory. Months ago, we had attached AirTags to our car keys because we kept losing them. Following a hunch, I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app. What popped up on the screen felt like a blow to the chest. Her car wasn't parked at the office. It was sitting outside a hotel, about 15 minutes away. Without thinking, I threw the car into gear and drove straight there. When I arrived, I didn't even need to step inside. Seeing her car neatly parked out front was enough to confirm everything I didn't want to believe. There was no urgent project, no looming deadline. Just Addison, choosing to be somewhere else, with someone else. The drive home was eerily silent, the weight of the truth pressing down so heavily I could barely breathe. All the way back, I wrestled with my thoughts. Should I confront her the second she walked through the door? Should I force her to look me in the eye and scramble for another lie? But the longer I sat with it, the clearer it became, it would be pointless. I didn't need more lies. I didn't want another excuse. Nothing she could say would ever make this right. Right then and there, I made my decision. I was finished. No fights. No begging. No dramatic scenes. Just silence, and walking away. Later that night, Addison came home. She tossed her bag on the couch like she had a million times before and immediately launched into a manufactured story, rattling off some sudden emergency at work, complete with made-up co-worker names who supposedly stayed late with her. I stood there, quietly watching her weave her lie, performing without a flicker of hesitation or guilt. And still, I said nothing. I didn't challenge her. I didn't demand the truth. I simply observed, and with every word she spoke, it became even more painfully obvious. There was nothing left to save. Our marriage had already died. She just hadn't realized it yet. The next morning, with everything crystal clear in my mind, I got up determined to take action. Without tipping Addison off, I began dismantling the life we had built together, starting with the savings we had carefully tucked away for a future home. Quietly, I moved the funds into accounts under only my name and swiftly converted most of it into physical assets, gold and silver, safely stored overseas, out of her reach and outside any court's jurisdiction. The next few days blurred into a rush of planning. Every move had to be perfect. No room for slip-ups, no second chances. I even retained a divorce attorney, setting the entire process in motion, laying the groundwork for a clean and final exit. At home, everything changed. I stopped pretending. If Addison wanted to spend her nights out, so be it. I mirrored her behavior, disappearing for hours at a time, never explaining where I went or who I was with. If she asked, and she rarely did, I gave her nothing but vague responses. When she came home, there were no accusations waiting for her, only silence. Conversations became minimal, just enough to avoid suspicion, while emotionally, I pulled further and further away. Occasionally, I caught her giving me puzzled looks, like she sensed something had shifted, but she never voiced her worries. Meanwhile, the thought of another man touching her made my skin crawl. Truthfully, Addison hadn't been mine for a long time. Weeks passed in this cold, detached dance. Then one evening, Addison asked if we could sit down and have a serious talk. I agreed to the conversation mostly out of curiosity. I wanted to hear what excuse she'd come up with. Addison sat across from me and dove into a speech about how modern relationships were evolving. According to her, society was changing, and maybe traditional views on marriage were just outdated relics. "I still love you," she insisted, "but what if seeing other people could actually make our relationship stronger?" She spoke like she was offering some profound revelation, trying to mask her betrayal as wisdom. But beneath her carefully chosen words, all I heard was guilt and desperation. She wasn't trying to fix what was broken between us. She was trying to excuse it. I kept my voice steady and met her gaze. "We don't need an open marriage, Addison," I said calmly. "This marriage is already over. You're free to be with whoever you've been waiting for." I laid it out clearly. She could start packing her things tonight, or I would. Either way, this was the end. At first, she stared at me, stunned, like the words didn't make sense in her head. Then came the predictable spiral, confusion, manipulation, the twisting of reality, trying to make me question what I knew deep down. It would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. I didn't bite. I told her flat out that I knew the truth, and that honestly, it no longer mattered. The divorce paperwork was nearly ready. There was nothing left worth saving. For once, Addison was silent. No elaborate stories, no fighting back, just stunned silence. I didn't stick around for whatever performance she had planned next. I stood up, walked out, and didn't look back. The next day, she tried reaching out. One night, she cornered me, tears in her eyes, begging me to believe I'd misunderstood everything. She promised we could fix it if we just fought harder, loved harder, tried harder. Hearing her say those things tore at me. But I didn't argue. I didn't debate. I simply nodded, and let the silence between us say everything. The door was already closed. From that point on, I spent as little time at the house as possible. I had no interest in hearing her half-hearted apologies or pretending things could ever be normal again. Meanwhile, The divorce process moved forward steadily. My attorney handled everything, and all I had to do was wait it out. Originally, Addison was supposed to move out after the divorce finalized. But predictably, she refused, clinging to some desperate hope that staying would somehow change my mind. I didn't let it. Instead, I packed only what I needed and rented a small apartment across town. Even as the months dragged on, Addison kept trying to pull me back. Some nights I get long texts, sometimes apologetic, other times full of blame, painting me as the villain for not giving her another chance. Other times, she left voicemails, some through tears, others acting as if nothing ever happened, casually suggesting we grab coffee like old friends. It was exhausting. But I stayed firm. I drew hard lines. No communication unless it went through my lawyer. I blocked her number everywhere except email, and even then, I barely glanced at the messages before forwarding them straight to my attorney. Looking back, if this entire experience taught me anything, it's this. Loyalty can't be forced. No amount of love can heal a relationship that someone has already abandoned in their heart. When trust breaks, it doesn't matter how much you pour into it, it will never be the same. I should have trusted my instincts from the start instead of constantly making excuses for her behavior. Another painful lesson? If you don't value yourself enough to walk away when someone shows you who they really are, you'll end up losing yourself piece by piece. For far too long, I walked on eggshells around Addison, hoping that if I just kept the peace long enough, things would somehow fix themselves. All it did was drain the life out of me. Staying quiet wasn't strength, it was self-betrayal. The more you tolerate disrespect, the more you teach someone that it's acceptable to keep crossing boundaries. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Real love doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't feel like anxiety or confusion. If being with someone feels like you're barely surviving instead of thriving, it's not love, it's a slow death. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. You deserve a true partnership, not a situation where you constantly have to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Never let anyone convince you that your needs are too much, or that expecting honesty somehow makes you the bad guy. And for those of you still reading, I truly want to hear your thoughts. If you had been in my position, would you have stayed and fought longer? Or would you have walked away sooner? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you know someone struggling in a situation like this, send them this story. Sometimes, realizing you're not alone is the first step toward choosing yourself again.